Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the Spanish Football Podcast. I'm Phil Kitromilides. Sid Lowe is in San Sebastian. Don't worry, we will hear from him a little bit later on in the pod. But Alex Kirkland, Al, is with me for today's show. Hello, Al.
Hello, Kitro. I've just had a breakfast smoothie. That's how comfortably I'm slipping into Sid's shoes here.
Sid usually has a smoothie for breakfast. That is
often mid-pod.
Why that is relevant. Yes, true. He is sometimes sipping on a smoothie as he's going off on a tangent and slipping in some caveats. Anyway, we will hear from Sydney in just a moment. Firstly, let me tell you what's happened on Matchday 20 in La Liga EA Sports so far. Friday night was a Catalan derby at the RCDE Stadium, which Girona won by 2-0. Both goals from the penalty spot. Espanyol still haven't won in 2026. Very impressive first half of the campaign, but winless so far in the 3 matches they played this year. Girona absolutely flying up to 10th in the table. Saturday was a pretty eventful game at the Bernabéu between Real Madrid and Levante. Not so much matters on the pitch, matters off the pitch, causing the headlines. An unbelievable reception from the fans for the players at the Bernabeu. I say unbelievable, actually incredibly believable, although it was quite
predictable. Very predictable. But yes, no, the volume was, pretty unprecedented.
We'll talk about that in just a second. Real Madrid, though, winning this weekend and cutting the gap on leaders Barcelona to just a point. They were beaten in San Sebastian last night 2-1 by Real Sociedad. Elsewhere, Mallorca with a really big win on Saturday against the Athletic Club, 3-2, possibly saving Yagoba Arrasate's job as manager of the team from the Balearic Islands. Osasuna beat Oviedo 3-2. Poor old Sid went to Pamplona, went to El Sadar, saw Oviedo score 2 goals, thought they were going to win a bloody game, but they didn't. They lost. Just as well he's not on, actually, to talk about that game, because
I couldn't have bared to hear him talk about it. I was watching the goal notifications coming on my phone, and even I, who don't care about Oviedo, it sounded especially cruel. Even in a season of cruelty, this was above and beyond.
We care a little bit about Oviedo just because, we want Sid to be...
Because we want Sid to be happy, yeah.
Yes. But he is not happy. Rock bottom. And they are 7 points from safety now. They're beginning to look a little bit doomed. Saturday night saw Betis beat Villarreal 2-0 at the Cartuja. Pretty decent win this for Betis. They were pretty comfortable against Villarreal. And second goal is a really nice goal from Pablo Fornals. And Betis are a little bit unpredictable, but they did get this a good win against Villarreal. Then on Sunday, what was predictable is that Getafe against Valencia was going to be a terrible game. It duly was, but Valencia managed to get a goal in the second half to win it 1-0. Massive win for them. Atletico Madrid beat Alaves 1-0. Alex Sorloth scoring the only goal of the game. Atleti actually hanging on towards the end. Alaves putting them under plenty of pressure, but they managed to hang on for that 1-0 win. Celta beat Rayo 3-0 in a really predictable result. We did predict this. It's all right. I knew it. I predicted it on the
you knew exactly what you had with absolute certainty. You predicted this result. I remember.
Yeah, I did say 4-0 to my son when he asked what was going to happen.
So in the end, he came out kind of on top.
Ni tan mal. And Real Sociedad beating Barca 2-1. Monday sees Elche host Sevilla. Now, it is going to be a very, very exciting second half of the La Liga season, so don't miss a thing. Come join us at patreon.com/TSFP. Patrons get the Monday and the Friday podcast without any adverts. Plus, they get a weekly Q&A pod and a bonus pod. And there's the newsletter. And there's the TSFP diary. And there's the Discord. You should join us. You can sign up from €4.75 a month, or if it's even cheaper, if you get an annual membership. So, to Real Sociedad, to Barcelona 1. Absolutely ridiculous game. Barcelona dominated. If you look at the stats, they are absolutely absurd. Barcelona with 6 big chances in terms of Opta-defined big chances, 25 shots, an XG of 3.69. How did they lose this game, Sid?
That's the question, isn't it? How did Barcelona not win this game? I guess the answer in part is because football. It's silly sometimes, isn't it? And I think last night was one of the silliest games I've ever seen in terms of trying to understand or trying to kind of fathom how it was that one of the teams didn't win. Let's give some of the reasons why. I mean, the obvious reasons here. Barcelona didn't win, well, because you've got the 2 disallowed goals and a disallowed penalty, because you've got really, really clear chances missed by Pedri and Dani Olmo, because you've got the 5 times that they hit the post, because you've got the 8 saves from Alex Ramiro, and one of them was absolutely phenomenal. And I guess in that sense, it's just because football. And you listen to Real Sociedad last night, and they were aware of the fortune. It was quite nice actually talking to Mikel Oyarzabal after the game in the mix zone, and asked about this performance and what they'd done. He said, well, and luck. You know, you've got to be honest. We've got to admit that we were very, very fortunate. Those goals disallowed for Barcelona were all very, very tight. I think you can probably see a rationale for all of them, even if, you know, personally, I think we've reached a point now where tiny things are becoming absolutely decisive all the time, and it's baffling at times. And Barcelona, I thought, played really, really well. I mean, this is 9 victories in a row until last night. At some point, that result was going to end, but you didn't think it was going to end on the night in which they produced probably the best performance in this run, which is now a run that's of course over. I think there's lots and lots of things to pick up on as well. I mean, the analysis in a way is to kind of just sort of shrug your shoulders and say, because football, because this is what happens. But I think there's some other things you can pick up on. For example, the goal. The second goal, that is. I think when Barcelona scored, I think there was a sense that that's it, right, the momentum is there, sort of, if you like, normal service is resumed, and I think Barcelona switched off momentarily. There was 59 seconds between the 1-1, which really should have set them up to win, and then being caught again and conceding again. I think on that goal, Joan Garcia makes a mess of it. I don't think he does a particularly good job of a first attempted save, but I think in particular Koubachi makes a mess of it twice in that move. And Barcelona, once they conceded that goal, they then collapsed for a bit. In fact, Real Sociedad had a couple of chances to have made it 3-1. And I think that's not surprising, to be perfectly honest. And you know, Frankie de Jong was saying this post game yesterday that there's a moment when you spent the whole game looking for this 1-1, then you're in it and it's done. It's almost as if your work is done and then bang. And I think it's then not surprising that for 15 minutes or so after that, they just couldn't kind of mentally get themselves back in the game. Now, I do sort of want to pick up on Real Sociedad here. And we always do this, and we always talk about the opponents. I think there's a tendency in Spain to see every defeat or draw from Real Madrid and Barcelona as purely a product of Real Madrid and Barcelona, and too often the opponents are not taken into consideration, and I think they should be. Now, in this case, it's a slightly difficult one, because I think we've seen a very significant change in Real Sociedad with Materazzo. I think we've seen a team that's more aggressive. I think we've seen a team that's more dynamic. I think we've seen a team that's a bit more direct, and a team that kind of believes in itself. And we've also seen, I think, an adaptable team that played differently against Atletico Madrid, as it did against Getafe, as it did against Osasuna, as it did now against Barcelona. But at times they were completely overwhelmed. And so that kind of analysis on this particular game, individually, this particular game, I'm not sure it does entirely stand up, because, you know, there's an awareness from them that they were kind of outplayed, that this is, I think, possibly the best performance from Barcelona this season. But you can then say, well, is it luck that you've got a brilliant goalkeeper? Ramiro was absolutely brilliant. Yeah, of course there's an element of fortune there, and Real Sociedad were absolutely clear about saying so. So maybe on this occasion, you just got to kind of take a step back and say, well, because it happens. It's an extraordinary night at Anoeta. We're 2 days away. Well, we're now 1 day away from the Tamborrada, the celebrations in the city where there's drumming, marching bands through the city of people drumming. You can hear it everywhere as they practice in the days building up to it. On the way into the game last night, Real Sociedad's players came in through a passageway, which is not really a gauntlet, but a passageway of drummers dressed as soldiers and chefs with giant comedy knives and forks and banging away at the drums, and a real sense of Materazzo taking on the identity of the city, not just a club. And actually the players last night, one of the things that Oyarzabal said post-game was that he's been impressed with Materazzi's willingness to kind of embrace the city, Donosti, and he talked a lot, Materazzo, of the kind of the atmosphere, the sense of occasion. He said after the game yesterday that there was something magic in the air. And so I suppose that's the answer then for all of this. It's magic. Never believe it's not so.
Sydney joining us from his hotel room.
Yeah, from the Audrey Hepburn suite at his favourite cinema-themed hotel in San Sebastian.
It's magic then. Real Sociedad won because of magic. No, I think Sid touched on all the themes.
Oh, because football.
There.
He said that's
Football.
the verdict. That's his column this week.
Yeah, because football. I mean, yeah, it was absolutely ridiculous. Barcelona 100% should have won this game, and I think he touched upon the fact that you know, they conceded that second goal, which killed them. There was no reaction after that.
Yeah,
well, there was a little bit of reaction in injury time, but I think, you know, they were really sucker punched by that second goal from Real Sociedad 59 seconds after the first one. I just wonder, you know, Barcelona didn't lose this game because of the high line. Often when we talk about them, the high line is mentioned all the time. This was not why it was, but I wonder if there's an element of a lack of, and as they say in Spanish, oficio, a lack of kind of know-how in seeing and managing games, which comes from maybe this being literally the youngest squad in La Liga, just knowing that, you know, that you cannot concede that goal that they conceded. And as he mentioned, Joan Garcia and Pau Cubarsí, both very young, not that experienced, and kind of at fault for that second goal. And I just wonder if again we're seeing just that lack of know-how how to manage games for Barcelona. That might cost them. Remember the Champions League semi-final last season against Inter Milan. Don't want to go back to that, but that was perhaps the most egregious example of this. And just to try and explain, you know, how Real Sociedad got that second goal, they weren't switched on enough in that moment, which they really should have been.
Yeah, I think psychologically, it's probably one of the most difficult scenarios to kind of deal with, is when you concede that soon after scoring. It's such an extreme kind of turnaround in such a short space of time, from being right back in the game to being behind again. And you mentioned Joan Garcia. It was an interesting performance from him, wasn't it? Because, I mean, the Oyarzabal goal, he doesn't get near it. I know that it's hit hard and it's not that far out, but Joan Garcia barely reacts at all. It doesn't get a hand up at all. And the second goal as well, I just think, I don't know, he sort of spilled the ball in the moments before it. And especially up against Alex Ramiro, who is, you know, as we've discussed, third choice goalkeeper in the Spain national team squad. Joan Garcia, not currently in the Spain squad, but really should be. This was, I mean, look, he's been great. He's been really good. But this wasn't, I think this wasn't a good performance from him at all.
So what we're saying is, if Barcelona, you know, they've been very good in the areas. Obviously, they were missing Rafinha as well, and he's someone that we haven't mentioned yet. And in all 5 of the games that Barcelona have lost this season, in all comps, Rafinha didn't start, which, you know, it's not an explanation, but I think it's more than just a coincidence that he hasn't been present from the start.
Well, we've talked about him being maybe their most important player in terms of everything that he contributes on and off the ball. So end product, and also what he does in terms of the working to win the ball back. Like, he's the one who sort of leads the way and makes it, just sort of sets the tempo for his teammates. And yeah, so without him, I think the pattern there, as you say, is pretty clear.
I wouldn't be too worried if I was a Barcelona fan of this game. I would be frustrated and disappointed and angry and confused at how you didn't win this game and that you've let Real Madrid back into the title race. But really, this was not a performance where you were like, Barca played terribly. They were overrun. There was no spirit. There was no you know, it wasn't that at all. It was just that they could not put the little round thing into the big rectangular thing.
Yeah, which is, of course, the most important thing in football. But no, if you look at the 2 performances this weekend from Barca and Real Madrid, you know, Barca played really well and lost. Madrid were mostly really quite unconvincing again and won. You will get games and you will get weekends like that at some point over the course of the season. And I agree. I don't think it has to be overly concerning.
Shout out to Pellegrino Materazzo, who mentioned has got Real Sociedad playing more on the front foot, more vertical. He literally said, you know, I want my players to pass the ball forward more. And he's had an incredible start to life as Real Sociedad manager, because I looked at his first few games and I thought, oh God, this is a tough start for old Reno. But he got a very creditable 1-1 draw against Atletico Madrid in his first game. Went away to Getafe and won a real battle there with a late injury time goal. They came from 2-0 down to win on penalties in the Copa del Rey against Osasuna, and now they've had this big win against Barcelona. So it's been a brilliant start for Reno, and he's got the Barça derby coming up next weekend as well. So I said, you know, when he was appointed, he had a good squad to work with. It's not like he was taking over a bunch of hopeless guys who were battling relegation, staring it square in the face. They were lower than they should be, and he's taken over a squad with quite a lot of good players to work with.
No, it's been really impressive. And look, this is a guy who, I don't know about you, Kitro, I knew next to nothing about him before he arrived. And like you say, the impact has been undeniable. Talking on TV last night after the game, he was asked, 7 points out of 3 games so far. You couldn't have asked for much more than that, could you? And he was like, well, I could have asked for 9. And he said, actually, he thought they probably could have had 9. But no, I think he's a really interesting appointment and like quietly, really quite impressive so far. Of course, it's still early days and lots of things can happen. But this is, coming into a job where you and Sid earlier in the season, when we had our sort of surprise picks, one of them was L'Oreal to really struggle and be dragged into a relegation battle. Look, they're still only, 5 points off the drop? Yes. I think because it's so tight between basically just off the European spots and relegation. So they're not out of the woods yet. But no, it's been really encouraging.
All right, let's move on and talk about what happened at the Bernabeu. Real Madrid beating Levante 2-0, a penalty from Kylian Mbappé in the second half, and thumping header from Raúl Asensio, enough to give Real Madrid all 3 points, a 2-0 win, a clean sheet, and cutting the gap on Barcelona to 1 point at the top of the table. That is almost incidental, given what happened at the state. I mean, it's not, and we will talk about the football in just a moment, but this was literally a historic day at the Bernabeu. You and I have been living in Madrid for 14
we've been at a lot
years.
of games at that stadium.
Covered almost all the majority of Real Madrid games during that time, and have never experienced anything like that. People who have covered Real Madrid for even longer, much longer than us, are saying this is almost unprecedented. The level of vitriol, anger, and fury directed at the players, at specific players, and for almost the entire game, the players were whistled when the bus
that's the thing,
turned up.
Kitro, because quite often it's like the crowd kind of loses interest at some point during the 90 minutes, right? And there are whistles, the first time or the second or the third time certain players touch the ball, and then it drifts away. But that wasn't the case. It was right the way through. And like you say, from the moment the bus arrived, when the players came out for the warm-up, I mean, the whistles when the players were in the huddle, the team huddle just before kickoff, I think that's the loudest whistling I've ever heard at the Bernabeu. For Vinicius Jr., it was right the way through the game. For Jude Bellingham, it was right the way through the game. For Valverde as well. We had chance in the 5th minute of Florentino resign, which we haven't had at the Bernabeu for a long time. I mean, you've got to go way back, right? Like 2015?
So I remember, I remember being at a very, very, very weird game, which Real Madrid won 10-2. Do you remember this game against Rayo?
Yeah.
They won 10-2, and there were huge chance of Florentino dimisión. Everybody was angry. Rayo
was that in 2015?
That was December 2015. Rayo actually took the lead in this game and ended up losing 10-2. And it came off the back of they'd lost the Clásico, I think 4-0.
It's the Benitez. Yeah, exactly. So yes, that era is really clear in my mind as hearing that a fair bit, but not since then, because of what happened after that. Zidane came in, they win 3 European Cups in a row. And you can't really argue with that. So that is significant. People waving white hankies, which is the other thing they do here in protest as well as whistling. And like I say, but basically never heard that level of kind of anger being expressed at the team. And not just the team, but the institution and the way that it's being run.
I think it's worth maybe just people will look at this from afar and we'll say, Real Madrid are 1 point off Barcelona. They're in good position to finish in the top 8 in the Champions League. Yes, they lost the Super Cup. Yes, they got knocked out of the Copa del Rey. Is this some kind of overreaction from the fans? But this is kind of what Real Madrid is all about. And I think there's this kind of misconstrued idea that Real Madrid, the only thing that matters is winning. And I actually don't think that's true. Yes, their approach to winning is malleable, and if they're up against a team where they have to sit back and defend, and all hands to the deck, and we sit deep and defend, but the fans will accept that. But what they won't accept is if you win, but they think that you're not trying or you're not playing well, then this is why they whistle. Because if you look at Real Madrid's result in La Liga, was it 5 consecutive wins, 5 or 6 consecutive? Like, they have been winning in La Liga, and obviously the loss at Albacete didn't help, and the loss against Barcelona Super Cup didn't help, and at all. But I just think that there's a perceived lack of effort. It's not necessarily the results, which obviously have been bad in those 2 cup competitions. It is how the fans perceive the players are approaching this big honor of wearing the Real Madrid shirt, and specific players, very specific players, because you were there, Raul, and you heard, Raul Asensio got applauded off. I think Thibaut Courtois got his name chanted. There were specific players that were targeted because the fans feel you have not been putting in enough effort.
Yeah. And look, the context is last season in which they didn't win a major trophy. That very rarely happens at Real Madrid. They didn't win a major trophy, and the view was that this was, it's partly about Ancelotti and maybe some of the deficiencies in Ancelotti's side, but also largely about the players, about players not being willing to work, about players not being willing to listen. The solution was bring in Xabi Alonso. That hasn't worked. And the feeling is that, again, it's the players who've essentially got him the sack. And so, yeah, the anger of the crowd is largely aimed at certain players in particular who haven't been performing, who, we know weren't buying into the whole Xabi Alonso project, and at basically the president at the very top of the club, who's the one who ultimately makes the decisions, a sort of a dissatisfaction with the way this whole project is going, and I feel like the right decisions aren't being made.
Go on.
No, I don't. Go on. You go, Kitro. Go on.
I was just going to say, we spoke about Alvaro Arbeloa with Sid in the bonus pod we did after the elimination by Albacete, and say, there's not as how much blame can you apportion to this manager who's been in charge for 24 hours, but there were certain aspects of how he approached the game which we did blame him for, not least the matchday squad that he chose to take to Albacete, which was devoid of some very important players, which he chose to leave in Madrid. And I do think the way he set up the team for this game at home to Levante to start with is a little bit questionable. And I know it's easy to say this with hindsight, but it did feel at the moment you saw the team sheet and you had Camavinga in that midfield over Arda Güler. You are at home to Levante, who will sit very deep. You have had considerable problems unlocking deep defenses all season. Someone like Arda Güler, this game is almost tailor-made for him, and yet he was left on the bench. Yes, and then he came on in the second half and had a massive impact, assisting basically both goals and being very, very influential. And I think that is actually a negative cross against Arbeloa's decision making, because I didn't think that was the right team selection. Then he brought him on and he was effective, so he did manage to rectify. But I don't want to be too harsh, but 2 games in from Alvaro Arbeloa, and some of his decision making has not been the most impressive for me.
Yeah, I'm reluctant to criticise Arbeloa too much. I think what this team really needs is sort of a radical overhaul in the way they play football, and you can't do that in, what have they had, like 2 or 3 training sessions this week? No. You just can't. So that fundamentally, that is the problem, and that's the sort of thing that takes time. So, but you're right. I mean, really, the thing that really stands out with Arda Güler is just what a difference it makes when he comes on. And it's not even like I think he's the best player in the world, but he's just, they need a player like that, and they don't have it when you've got Tchouaméni and Camavinga and Bellingham. And like you say, it's chalk and cheese when he's on the field. Suddenly there's football. Suddenly football is being played, and there's someone there who's getting hold of the ball and playing the right passes and making the right decisions and opening teams up by breaking lines. And Mastantuono as well had his best game, maybe his best performance so far for Real Madrid. I thought he was good, but I mean, Arda Güler was really the one. And like I say, it's not just what he does. It's just it really draws your attention to what the team is lacking or was lacking in the first half when he wasn't on the field. So no, I wouldn't criticize Arbeloa too much in terms of that aspect of his job so far. More concerning for me is the way he's been handling off the pitch duties. He said 1 or 2 things in his post-match press conference here, which I really have a hard time accepting. I know why he's saying them, and it's not a massive surprise because I think it's the kind of line we expect him to take. But I find some of the things he's saying in the presses I find quite troubling.
Like?
Well, he was asked about the chanting of Florentino resign in particular. And while he previously said in terms of the whistles of the players, he said, I respect the Bernabeu. It's fine. Those whistles are for me as well. He made all the right noises there. But when asked specifically about the Florentino chants, he adopted I would describe it as a near kind of conspiratorial kind of tone, saying we know where these where this noise comes from, the campaigns, where they come from. I know where they come from. I won't be fooled. And essentially, he said that you cannot be a real Real Madrid fan and chant against the president, which I just think is an incredibly dangerous line of argument when we are deciding who is a real Real Madrid fan and who isn't based on their opinions about certain topics. It's the kind of argument we've heard a lot lately in politics and elsewhere. And I just think I don't know. I just don't have any time for it, to be honest. But so yeah, that sort of thing, I like I say, troubles me.
Real Madrid in action in the Champions League tomorrow night at home to Monaco. The crowd usually on European nights at the Bernabeu is a little bit different. I don't think there's going to be as much whistling, and I think they've kind of made their point, although it would be interesting to see how Vinicius reacts, because he went off at full time very quickly, just ran off the pitch when other players stayed on the pitch to try and make a little bit of amends with the crowd after the victory. He just ran off.
Yeah, speaking to a colleague who was talking to someone very senior at Real Madrid yesterday, and they were saying that Vinny and Bellingham in particular, because they were the ones who got whistled the most, were really, really affected by what happened on Saturday, and that it was going to be difficult to recover them in terms of their morale. So it's definitely one to watch. I agree. I wouldn't expect as many whistles. I think people's have a limited, it's not like attention span, but you know what I mean? I don't know how long you can sustain that. I think, yeah, I agree. I think you probably make your point and then you think, okay, let's try and get behind the team. But it's going to be there. It's going to be there just below the surface, kind of waiting to kind of come out again.
Forgive us for dwelling on this, but like we said, it was genuinely a historic day at the Bernabeu for this kind of reaction. This doesn't happen very often at all. So our being there felt like we had to dedicate some time to talking about that situation. There is something else I want to talk about this week in La Liga, and it's actually kind of like a non-footballing matter, but I think it's important that we mention it. In the Celta Vigo Rayo Vallecano game, Celta won 3-0 against Rayo, deserved and comfortable victory for the Galicians. But what caught my eye in this was the campaign that Celta Vigo as a club put forward in defense of Borja Iglesias. Now, Borja Iglesias in the previous game away at Sevilla had received homophobic insults by some Sevilla ultras after the game, including "A ver si te mueres, maricón de mierda." Hopefully you die, you gay.
Yeah. Just, deeply offensive.
Bad words, deeply offensive, homophobic words to Borja Iglesias. As far as I know, the reason why he was targeted is because he paints his fingernails. That's it. I think that's it. That's why. To which the club and one of the peñas of Celta Vigo, they organised this reaction and urged fans to come with their fingernails painted to the game. So tens of thousands of male and female Celta Vigo fans, some of the Celta Vigo players as well, had their fingernails painted. The ultras behind the goal of the Celta Vigo had the LGBTQ flag flying high amongst the other flags that they traditionally fly during the game. Celta Vigo's social media accounts posting all sorts of things, pictures of the fans and little emojis of their nails. They posted in response to this earlier on in the week, for Borja Iglesias, we're proud of you, of who you are on and off the pitch. And it has to be said that on the pitch, Borja Iglesias is an absolute bastard to play against. Off the pitch, he's one of the nicest fellas that you can meet in football. And I just felt that this is something positive that we can highlight in reaction to something really negative and appalling and disgusting that really has no place. It's so mind-bogglingly stupid that it's difficult to get your head round. But the reaction, I thought, has been positive and just worth highlighting.
Yeah, and especially quite often we end up really disappointed by the way that Spanish clubs and institutions handle this kind of thing. So you're right. For once, if they've got it pretty much right, let's let's highlight it. Let's talk about it. I hadn't seen that. That's great, Kitra. Thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Yeah, no. It was very very visible. Actually, I was watching the game with my son, and he's like, "Oh, look, Hugo Alvarez has got his fingernails painted." I was like, "Yeah, he does," and I sort of explained to him why. He was a little bit confused.
How about that as a perfect example? If that was replicated in any way in sort of living rooms around the country, then that's great.
Exactly. Atleti 1, Alaves 0. I didn't actually watch this game, Al. Saw the highlights.
No, me neither. What I was going to say was there are some incredible stats on Atleti's lack of cutting edge. Not just in this game where they had 23 shots, 6 on target, and just 1 goal. I think in 2026 so far, they've had 70 shots and scored 4 goals. Like they are not being clinical enough. They are, and this is
contundencia.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's literally their coach's favorite word. He talks about it
the
all
first
the time,
day of the season.
Simeone. Yeah. He always goes on about this. That this is the difference. This is what you need at the highest, whether it's, to win the league, whether it's to go far in the Champions League, you need to be convincing, clinical, take those opportunities. And they're not doing that. And so, that doesn't bode well for the rest of the season, for whatever's going to happen in the Champions League and whether Atleti can get anywhere close to the big two.
I wonder what happens in the transfer market for Atletico Madrid, because two big players have left. Certainly, they've brought in some money for Giacomo Raspadori and Conor Gallagher. I say big players; they weren't necessarily getting that many minutes, but Conor Gallagher was certainly a useful squad player in midfield.
Yeah, he was kind of the fifth man, wasn't he? In midfield, he never really consolidated his place in the team, and you got the feeling that Simeone was. I mean, have a look. I was looking the other day at Conor Gallagher's minutes for Atleti this season, and it's really it stands out the fact that he very rarely starting games, like almost always a sub. And when he had started games, he'd been taken off at half time, I think more than once. Like you look at there are a couple of 45 minutes in there, which is not good. You're right, they're not big players in terms of contribution, but the money for La Liga is big. If you're talking about what they're going to get their money back for Gallagher, so sort of 40 million, something like that. And that, let's see if they reinvest it. They've got a bit of work to do.
I think they need to reinvest it in terms of replacing Conor Gallagher, and they are, I think, actively trying to get a midfielder in. In terms of Raspadori, I don't necessarily think that is too pressing an issue.
No, well, he'd been used hardly at all and done nothing. So and
there's enough players in that kind of position to provide cover. We'll see. All right. Before we go, this is what happened in the Segunda División. Racing are still top after a 4-1 win over promotion rivals Las Palmas. It was first against second.
I know. Did you see? It was I forget the chap's name. The guy who scored the opening goal was the one who'd missed that great chance against Barca in the cup in midweek.
Yes.
So it was, and he's a youngster, and you could tell that from his celebration that it meant a lot. So that was good to see.
Lozano, and they're on 41 points. Castellón, a second, level on 38 points with Las Palmas after beating Leganés 2-0, and Depor won 2-1 at Almeria. So they're on 37 points. It's really, really tight at the top of the table in this Segunda. It's a really interesting battle for automatic promotion. That's it for today's edition of the Spanish Football Podcast. We'll be back tomorrow over at patreon.com/TSFP with our Q&A pod. There's going to be a bonus pod on Thursday, the TSFP Diary. There's loads of Spanish football coverage over at patreon.com/TSFP. Come and join us for very little money per week, has to be said. Very, very little money. But if you want a free podcast, we'll do another one on Friday, looking ahead to what's coming up in La Liga this weekend. So make sure you join us then. Adios.
Bye.